They left her to rot in a tomb of ice while they sipped margaritas in the sun. A pink note. A severed phone line. A grandmother dying on a kitchen floor. My name is Sherwin, and my family just made the deadliest mistake of their lives. They forgot that the girl they erased was trained to hunt people exactly like them. I didn't come home for a holiday. I came home for a reckoning. But the nightmare didn't start with that note. It began the moment the steel doors hissed open and I was vomited out into the heart of the storm. The Metra train station in Winnetka was a desolate island of concrete swallowed by the white fury of the lake effect blizzard. As I stepped onto the platform, the wind ripped through my civilian clothes, a sharp reminder that my CID-issue boots were the only military-grade armor I had left. I adjusted the strap of my duffel bag, my boots crunching rhythmically against the frozen drifts. Through the haze of snow, the multi-million-dollar estates of the North Shore loomed like ghosts of a life I had outgrown. I watched my breath mist in the air, a fleeting ghost of warmth in a world that felt increasingly hollow. Have you ever walked toward a place that was supposed to be home, only to feel like a stranger trespassing on someone else's dream? Looking back now, I should have seen the signs. The neighboring mansions glowed with the amber warmth of Thanksgiving lanterns, their windows fogged by the laughter of families reunited over turkey and wine. But as I turned the corner toward the Vance estate, the lights died. My childhood home stood like a jagged obsidian tooth against the gray sky, unlit, uninviting, and eerily silent. I reached the front porch, the oak door standing tall and indifferent. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't expect a welcome. I pulled out my spare key, the cold metal biting into my palm like a warning. As the lock clicked, I didn't feel relief. I felt the familiar, sharp alertness of a CID investigator entering a crime scene. The air that rushed out to meet me was sharper than the storm I had just escaped. It was stagnant, smelling of old dust and something far more sinister. Rot. Respect is earned in the presence of love, but I realized in that moment that dignity is something you must maintain yourself when love is absent. I stood in the foyer, the silence so heavy it hummed in my ears. There was no scent of rosemary or roasting poultry, just the biting chill of a house that had been stripped of its soul. I haven't been forgotten. I've been erased. That's where it all started. I moved toward the cabin, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood like a drumbeat. On the granite counter, under the dim glow of my tactical flashlight, I found it. A bright pink note, cheerful and mocking, weighed down by an empty cocktail glass that had frozen solid to the stone. I picked it up, the ink blurring slightly under my gaze. We went to Cancun. Take care of Grandma. Don't ruin our holiday. Love, Vance and Xanthi. My jaw tightened, the CID training kicking in before the granddaughter's grief could take hold. I checked the thermostat. 40 degrees. I looked at the refrigerator. The light was dead, the plug pulled from the wall. My gaze followed the trail of frost on the tile toward the basement door. There, collapsed in a heap of thin wool and faded memories, was Alara, my grandmother. Her fingers were inches away from the wall jack, but the phone line had been manually severed. A clean surgical cut. This wasn't a power outage. This was a calculated choice. Vance had manually turned off the furnace gas valve, knowing exactly what a Chicago winter would do to a 78-year-old woman left in a tomb of brick and mortar. He hadn't just gone on vacation. He had left a death warrant on the kitchen counter. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I knelt on that icy floor, peeling off my heavy military trench coat and wrapping it around her frail, shivering frame. I shared my body heat with her, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Forgiveness isn't about letting people off the hook, I whispered into her hair. It's about refusing to let their cold hearts freeze your soul. I reached for my field kit, my hands steady as I checked her thready pulse. I was Sherwin, the girl they thought was too difficult for their polished world. And right now, I was the only thing standing between Alara and the dark. I'm here, Grandma, I whispered as her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes glazed over from hypothermia. The storm is over. You're not a burden. You're my only remaining home. She struggled to speak, her voice hoarse, a pain that pierced my heart. To me, she wasn't just a victim. She was the woman who had secretly sent me letters, secretly mailing letters and packages when my parents stopped answering my calls at Fort Hood. Before the sirens of the ambulance I had summoned could reach the driveway, I did what I was trained to do. I took high-resolution photos of the note, the unplugged fridge, and the jagged ends of the phone line. In America, the law doesn't care about the tears you shed over a broken heart. It only bows to the truth you can prove in a court of record. I secured the Cancun note in a plastic evidence bag, a pink slip of paper that had become a confession. The paramedics burst through the door, their red lights washing the foyer in the color of a warning. As they loaded Alara onto the stretcher, I reached into the pocket of her cardigan. My fingers brushed against a scrap of paper, a hand-drawn map of the basement storage room with a single date circled in red. 11/24. My birthday. Alara gripped my hand one last time before they lifted her, her voice a ghostly wisp. The safe. Under the floor? Sherwin, they don't know about 11/24. I stood in the doorway, watching the red lights of the ambulance fade into the raging snowstorm. My knuckles turned white from pressing so hard against the doorframe. The safe Alara mentioned didn't just contain jewelry or old papers. It held the weapons I needed to expose my father's lies and reclaim the life they thought they had successfully buried. The sterile hum of the Northwestern Memorial ICU was a jarring contrast to the silence of the Winnetka house. I stood by the glass, watching the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator pump life into Alara's frail chest. It was the only heartbeat in the room, a mechanical tether keeping her from drifting into the gray. My CID-trained mind, usually an iron vault of logic, fought a losing battle against the lump forming in my throat. I brushed a silver strand of hair from her forehead, her skin feeling like parchment, dry, brittle, and impossibly cold. Have you ever looked at someone you love and realized they were nearly extinguished by the very people supposed to cherish them? It's a hollow feeling, like standing on the edge of a canyon with no bottom. I didn't want revenge. Revenge is a messy, emotional wildfire. I wanted restitution. I wanted the scales to balance, even if I had to put my own soul on the line to tip them. As the machines beeped their indifferent tally, I whispered into the stillness, "She's a fighter. She's survived a winter her own son created. She's not going anywhere." Alara's eyelids fluttered, a sudden frantic movement. She didn't ask for water or the comfort of a blanket. Her hand, surprisingly strong in its desperation, clamped onto my wrist. 11/24. Sherwin, your day, the roots of the house, she wheezed. The effort seemed to drain the very color from her lips. 11/24. November 24th. My birthday. I realized then that inheritance isn't just about the deeds and the gold they leave in your hands. It's about the map they leave in your heart. Some families leave scars as their only legacy, but Alara was giving me a compass. I squeezed her hand back, a silent vow passing between us. The nurse stepped in, checking the monitors, but I was already gone. My mind already halfway back to the shadows of the North Shore. The return to the Winnetka residence felt like entering a tomb I had already sealed. I didn't use the main lights. I didn't want to alert the ghosts. Instead, I clicked on my high-intensity tactical flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a scalpel. I moved through the foyer, past the granite counter where that mocking pink note still sat. Integrity is doing the right thing when the lights are out and your family has forgotten your name. I wasn't breaking in. I was reclaiming what had been stolen from the woman who spent 40 years making this place a home. I descended into the basement, the air growing damp and heavy. My light swept over the furnace unit. I knelt, my fingers tracing the cold metal of the gas valve. There it was. Clear, jagged tool marks where a wrench had been forced against the lock. A "Do Not Operate" tag lay on the dusty concrete, ripped away with such violence the paper was scarred. This wasn't a malfunction. Vance had stood right here in this damp darkness and purposefully turned off the life support of this house. He didn't just walk away, he sabotaged the sanctuary. My light shifted, searching for the roots Alara had whispered about. I moved to the storage room in the back, where the old Chicago brick met the foundation. I remembered where her prayer rug used to sit, a small island of faith in a basement of clutter. I kicked aside a pile of empty storage boxes labeled with Isolde's name. Under the dust and the cobwebs, I found it. A hidden seam in the floorboards, so precise it was nearly invisible to the untrained eye. But I wasn't untrained. I was a hunter. I pried the board up, the wood groaning in protest. Tucked into a cavity in the joists was a heavy steel safe. I didn't have to guess the combination. I dialed 1124. The bolt slid back with a heavy metallic thud that echoed through the empty house like a gavel. Inside, there was no jewelry or silver, just a thick manila envelope and a handwritten letter addressed to me in Alara's elegant, upright cursive. I pulled out the documents, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Predatory lending. The words leapt off the page, cold and predatory. Vance hadn't just spent the family savings on his failed wealth management schemes. He had used this very house, the house his father built, as collateral for a private, high-interest loan from a firm that didn't appear on any legal registry. I flipped through the pages, my eyes narrowing at the signatures. There it was. Alara's name, scrawled in a shaky, uncertain hand. It was a poor imitation, dated 4 months ago, exactly when Alara had been hospitalized for a minor fall. He had forged her life away while she lay in a hospital bed, trusting him. I felt a cold, tactical resolve settle over me, replacing the initial shock. This was financial exploitation on a grand scale, a slow-motion robbery disguised as caregiving. But as I dug deeper into the envelope, I found something that made the blood in my veins turn to slush. It was a file labeled Life Insurance Beneficiary Change. Inside was a surveillance photo of me. I was at Fort Hood, standing near the motor pool, looking tired and unobserved. My breath hitched. Vance wasn't just waiting for Alara to pass away to claim the house. He was betting on my death in the line of duty. He had taken out a supplemental policy on my life, naming himself as the sole beneficiary, citing my high-risk occupation as the justification for the premiums he was paying with Alara's stolen pension. I stared at my face in that blurry photograph, realizing that to my father, a dead soldier was worth more than a living daughter. I had been reduced to a commodity. My potential sacrifice was merely a strategy for him to settle his debts. I realized that was the moment Sherwin, the daughter, died, and Sherwin, the investigator, took complete control. But that photograph changed everything. It wasn't just about a cold house anymore. It was about a family that had become a criminal organization. I stood up, the manila envelope clutched in my hand like a weapon. The quiet, heavy mood of the basement was no longer oppressive. It was empowering. I had the map. I had the motive. And I had the one thing Vance never counted on: the training to use them. The air in the garage was a stale cocktail of gasoline and winter rot. I pulled on a pair of black tactical gloves, the latex snapping against my wrists like a clinical seal. In the military, they teach you that the truth isn't found in what people say. It's found in what they throw away. I dragged the heavy plastic bins to the center of the floor and tipped them onto a tarp, the contents spilling out in a silent cascade of domestic debris. I began a systematic trash pull, sorting through the wreckage of a family that had decided I was no longer a living entity. My CID training dictated every movement, cold, precise, and devoid of the hesitation a daughter should feel. I found it beneath a layer of discarded holiday catalogs, my military graduation photos, shredded into jagged strips. My letters from the front lines, once folded with care, were now just confetti buried under coffee grounds. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had performed a ritualistic erasure of my existence. Among the debris, I found a document that made my blood run like liquid nitrogen. It was a forged affidavit of death. Vance had filed it with the local VA branch, claiming I had perished in a training accident at Fort Hood. Beside it lay the confirmation for a $400,000 claim on my service member's group life insurance. My own father was monetizing my life while siphoning Alara's pension to fund a lifestyle built on ghosts. A home is built on love, but a house of cards is built on lies. I'm not here to burn it down. I'm here to let the wind blow it over. I stood among the trash, the neon garage light flickering overhead like an unstable pulse. I felt a chilling sense of betrayal, but it was tempered by a stoic resolve that only years in the service can forge. Have you ever felt the weight of being dead to the people who gave you life? It's a silence that screams louder than any explosion. I tucked the forged affidavit into my evidence bag. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was a federal witness to a crime that began at the dinner table. At 4 a.m., I moved into Alara's office, turning her mahogany desk into a makeshift command center. I pulled out an old tablet Isolde had left behind, Its screen cracked like the very integrity of the family. Using military-grade encryption software, I bypassed the security locks to access the family's shared iCloud. I didn't hesitate. I was a predator, a real predator, and the digital footprint was still fresh. The screen lit up with a nauseatingly bright light as the first batch of videos synced. It was a clip uploaded just 6 hours ago. The sun in Cancun was a blinding, cruel gold. Isolde and Xanthi were on a yacht, clinking crystal flutes of champagne while the turquoise water danced behind them. They looked radiant, untouched by the blizzard or the dying woman they had left behind. Isolde's voice drifted through the speakers, sharp and entitled, "To the cold house and the fresh start. By the time we get back, the problem will be solved and the debt will be buried." I watched my sister dance in the sun, her laughter a jagged blade against the memory of Alara's blue lips. The contrast was physically nauseating. They didn't just forget us, they actively chose to profit from the death of every person who truly loved them. I felt a surge of professional fury, the kind that sharpens the mind rather than clouding it. I haven't been forgotten. I've been traded for a first-class ticket to a paradise built on a funeral. I began a digital backup of every video, every fraudulent insurance claim, and the forged DNR I had uncovered earlier. I prepared the case file with the cold precision of a federal agent, labeling each folder with the dates of their transgressions. My name, Sherwin, appeared on the insurance fraud documents like a label on a product. I wasn't a soldier to them. I was a payout. I sat there as the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the frost on the windows, realizing the hunt was nearly over. I took a moment to call the hospital, my voice cracking for the first time as the nurse answered. "She's stable, Sherwin," the woman whispered. "She's been asking for the soldier all night. She knows you're here." Tears pricked my eyes, the only ones I allowed myself to shed in the silence of that house. The greatest act of kindness isn't always a hug. Sometimes, it's a boundary made of iron. I'm doing this for the woman who kept my letters when the world thought I was a ghost. I looked at a business card I had found in Alara's 24 safe, a retired judge and an old friend of hers. I realized I couldn't wait for the vacationers to return before I made my move. I needed a witness who couldn't be bought, someone who understood that in Winnetka, reputation is everything and the truth is the only thing that can destroy it. I checked the time. The sun was rising on a Friday that would change our lives forever. I stared at the video of Isolde laughing one last time before slamming my laptop shut with a resounding bang. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer the silence of the abandoned, but the silence of the prepared. To win this battle, I needed to step out of the shadows and bring the light of justice to every dark corner of this land. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer the silence of the ignored, but the silence of the prepared. I realized that to win this war, I needed to step out of the shadows and bring the light of the law into every dark corner of this estate. I sat in Alara's den, the only room in the Winnetka mansion that still felt like it belonged to a human being rather than a showroom. The morning light was gray and thin, creeping across the desk where I had spent the last few hours cataloging a lifetime of greed. I began sifting through the final pile of legal documents Vance had carelessly left in a locked drawer, thinking his secrets were safe behind a flimsy piece of brass. My CID training made my hands steady even as my stomach twisted. I found a notarized "Do Not Resuscitate" DNR order for Alara. It was a cold, clinical piece of paper that stated she should not receive medical intervention if her heart stopped or her breathing failed. But the ink that turned my blood to ice was the signature at the bottom. It was my name, Sherwin, allegedly signed by me as her primary healthcare proxy while I was deployed. If I hadn't arrived early, the hospital would have been legally barred from saving her life. This wasn't just neglect. It was a legally armored execution designed to look like a natural passing. They didn't just want her gone. They wanted me to be the one who killed her on paper. I stared at that forged signature, my voice a hollow whisper in the empty room. True strength isn't found in how much you can hurt others, but in how much you can protect those who cannot protect themselves. They didn't just forge my name. They tried to forge my conscience. I placed the forged DNR next to a childhood photo of Alara and me at the park. In the photo, I was 6, holding her hand like it was the only thing keeping me on the planet. The contrast between the cold, legalistic murder attempt and the warmth of that memory felt like a physical blow. We all pretend to be strong until the right pain finds us. I didn't realize it then, but that document was the moment I stopped being a daughter and became a sentinel. Looking back now, I should have seen the depth of their malice sooner. By Friday afternoon, I was sitting in a secure office in downtown Chicago, the lake wind howling against the glass. Lawyer David Monroe, a man who had known Alara since the 70s, sat across from me. He didn't look like a high-powered shark. He looked like a man who believed in the weight of a handshake. I presented the case file, the photos of the shut-off gas valve, the predatory loan documents from the 24 safe, the insurance fraud, and the forged DNR. Monroe's face went from professional curiosity to a deep, simmering disgust. "In Illinois, Sherwin, this is a felony," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Financial exploitation and attempted endangerment of a senior. With your CID background, your evidence is airtight. They didn't just break the law, they handed you the handcuffs." He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. "Have you ever stood at a crossroads where doing the right thing meant destroying the people who gave you your name?" I didn't ask for a settlement. I didn't ask for an apology. I leaned forward, my hands flat on his mahogany desk. "I want a protective order and an immediate transfer of guardianship," I said, my voice as level as a horizon line. "I don't want their money. I want their influence over this house and my grandmother erased. Forever." Monroe nodded slowly. He understood that I wasn't looking for a payout. I was looking for a purge. I refused to press charges for the insurance fraud against myself. At least not yet. A warrior only draws her sword when the shield is no longer enough. Right now, I was the shield. I needed that fraud charge as a tactical reserve, a final blow if they tried to fight back. Sometimes the most powerful move is the one you don't make until the very end. I walked out of his office with the legal armor I needed, the heavy papers in my bag feeling like a loaded weapon. When I returned to the Winnetka house, I didn't hide. I set up my military laptop in the dining room, the very place they expected to find a festive turkey dinner and a submissive daughter. I transformed the room into a command center. I installed high-definition covert recording devices in the common areas, hiding them behind the expensive art and the hollow trophies of my father's career. I wasn't just waiting for them, I was inviting them into an auditorium where their every word would be recorded for posterity. I turned the heat back on, but I set it to a clinical 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Just enough to be legal, but not enough to be welcoming. I wanted them to feel a chill the moment they stepped inside, a reminder of the frost they had left behind. The house began to smell of lemon oil and old books again, the scent of Alara's era reclaiming the space from Vance's hollow luxury. It's funny how a scent can feel like an act of rebellion. I didn't realize it then, but the house was starting to breathe again. As the afternoon sun dipped below the horizon, I prepared a single plate of food for myself. I sat alone at the long mahogany table, the silence no longer heavy with grief, but sharp with anticipation. They say blood is thicker than water, but in this house, blood has been used as ink for a death warrant. I am the daughter they erased, but I am the soldier who came home. I felt a solitary strength that I hadn't known since my first deployment. I checked the arrivals at O'Hare Airport on my phone. Their flight from Cancun was on time, scheduled to land in 6 hours. I went upstairs and adjusted my uniform. I made sure every ribbon was aligned to the millimeter, every shoe polished until it caught the dim light of the hallway. I wasn't preparing for a dinner. I was preparing for a social ambush. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the woman I had become. Have you ever had to choose between your family and your soul? I sat down at the head of the dining table, the laptop screen casting a cold blue light on my metals. Each minute felt like an hour, each creak of the old house like footsteps. I thought of Alara in the intensive care unit, struggling to breathe, her own son trying to steal her breath away. I thought of the letters she secretly sent me, letters saying I was loved when the world was silent. I wasn't doing this for myself. I was doing this for the only person who remembered my existence. The house grew darker as the blizzard outside began to howl again. I didn't turn on the lamps. I stayed in the blue light, a ghost in a uniform waiting for the living to return. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of duty. The tactical plan was set, the legal trap was armed, and the evidence was secured. By the time the sun rose tomorrow, the power dynamics of this family would be irrevocably changed. I didn't know what was waiting for me next, but I was ready. I heard the sound of a car engine echoing in the distance as it turned into a dead end. The headlights swept across the dining room wall, a fleeting white streak before the engine stalled. My heart didn't race. It slowed, returning to the calm, focused state I'd learned working in the field. I closed my laptop slightly, still letting the blue light shine on it. I didn't move. I just stared at the front door, waiting for the sound of the key, which now held no power. The front door swung open, and the cheerful, sun-drenched voices of Vance, Xanthi, and Isolde echoed into the hallway, tinged with the scent of sea salt and salt-rimmed glasses. They laughed and talked about the magnificent sunset they'd seen on the boat, completely unaware that the house they were entering was no longer theirs. But that was the last time I heard them laugh without fear. The storm had come, and I was the one holding the lightning bolt. The front door burst open, and for a fleeting second, the house was violated by the scent of expensive sunscreen and the artificial zest of sea salt margaritas. Vance, Xanthi, and Isolde spilled into the foyer, their laughter sharp and abrasive against the heavy, clinical silence I had curated. They were recounting a hilarious incident at the airport bar, their voices loud with the entitlement of people who believe the world exists only for their amusement. They didn't even notice the temperature. The house was a steady, cold 65 degrees, a temperature that felt like a slap against their sun-warmed skin. I sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table, my laptop casting a sharp blue light against the ribbons on my uniform. I remained perfectly still, a silhouette of military discipline in a room they thought they owned. Looking back now, I realized this was the moment their world began to tilt on its axis. Have you ever stood in the presence of someone who has already decided your fate? It's a quiet power, one that doesn't need to shout to be felt. Vance flicked on the overhead light, the sudden glare washing out the room. He stopped dead when he saw me, his tan face twisted from surprise to an immediate, practiced scoff. "Sherwin, what the hell are you doing sitting in the dark like a creep?" he barked, dropping his designer luggage with a heavy thud. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about the storm. "Where's your grandmother? I told you to have dinner ready. We're starving." I didn't rise. I didn't even blink. I just looked at him with the cold, detached gaze of a CID investigator staring at a person of interest. "Grandma is at Northwestern Memorial ICU," I said, my voice as level as a horizon line. "And I'm not here as your cook. I'm here as the witness you forgot to kill." The laughter died in Xanthi's throat. Isolde narrowed her eyes, her hand tightening around the strap of her luxury handbag. The entitled arrogance in the room was palpable, a thick fog of denial that I was about to burn away. I calmly reached out and slid the bright pink note across the polished wood of the table. "You left this on the counter," I said, "along with a manually shut-off gas valve and a severed phone line." I watched Vance's throat hitch. He tried to laugh it off, that familiar booming sound he used to drown out anyone who challenged him. "The furnace is ancient, Sherwin. It probably clicked off on its own. You're always so dramatic, making a mountain out of a molehill. This is exactly why we didn't want you here." "The gas valve was turned at the main, Vance. It takes a wrench and intent," I replied. Isolde stepped forward, her voice dripping with a venomous condescension. "You're just bitter because you weren't invited to Mexico. You've always been the jealous one, trying to ruin everyone's fun with your duty and your service. Grandma probably just forgot how to use the phone. She's old, Sherwin. Things happen." I didn't argue. I simply tapped a key on my laptop. The large TV on the far wall flared to life, displaying the high-definition footage of the paramedics wheeling Alara out of the house. The timestamp was large and undeniable. "The house was 40 degrees when I found her," I said. "In the military, we call this target neutralization. In Illinois, the law calls it elder abandonment." I looked at my mother, Xanthi, who was clutching her pearls as if they could protect her from the truth. "You can buy a first-class ticket to the sun, but it won't melt the ice in your heart. You didn't just leave a sick woman. You left your own conscience in the cold." For a moment, the silence was absolute. I could see the panic beginning to leak through the cracks of Vance's tanned mask. But then, his expression shifted. A dark, desperate smirk returned to his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Always the hero of the family," he sneered. "I knew you'd come back looking for a payday. I knew you'd try to shake us down." He looked past me toward the foyer, where Officer Miller had just stepped inside, his hand resting warily on his belt. "Officer, thank God you're here," Vance shouted, his voice suddenly full of feigned terror. "I was going to call you from the car. My daughter, she's been threatening us." He tapped his phone screen, and a recording began to play. It was my voice. Perfectly, chillingly my voice. In the recording, I was shouting, threatening to suffocate the old woman if Vance didn't transfer $500,000 from the estate into an offshore account in my name. It was a sophisticated AI deepfake, a digital assassination attempt designed to weaponize my own CID background against me. "She's the one who did it!" Vance cried, Xanthi beginning to sob hysterically into her hands. "She came home early to finish the job so she could inherit everything. She's a monster." I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs, realizing that Vance had been preparing for this confrontation just as meticulously as I had. He wasn't just a thief. He was a predator who had learned how to use my own world of intelligence against me. Officer Miller looked at me, his eyes full of a weary, professional suspicion. He didn't see a staff sergeant. He saw a potential extortionist with the skills to make a house look like a crime scene. "Staff Sergeant Sherwin, I'm going to need you to step away from that laptop," he said, his voice hard. "This recording is very specific. It sounds like you've been planning this shakedown for a long time." I didn't move. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the edge of the table, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. I looked from the officer's wary gaze to my father's triumphant smirk. He thought he had won. He thought that in this house of mirrors, a loud lie would always outrun a quiet truth. I realized then that being the good daughter was never going to save me. I had to prove that the voice they were hearing wasn't the sound of my greed, but the echo of his desperation. "Officer," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "In my line of work, we don't just listen to what's said. We look at who benefits from the silence." I looked Vance dead in the eye, and for the first time I saw the flicker of real fear behind the bravado. He knew I wasn't backing down. He knew that the recording was a gamble, and I was about to call his bluff. The storm wasn't over. It was just changing direction. But this was the moment I stopped trying to save my family and started trying to save myself. I had been erased from their lives long ago, and now they were trying to erase me from this world. But I was a soldier. I was an investigator. And I knew that every lie online leaves a trail. I looked at the officer and said, "I'll put the laptop down, but I advise you to listen carefully to that recording, because the truth has no script." The air in the dining room was thick enough to choke on. Vance's smirk was wide, a predator believing the trap had finally snapped shut on its prey. Officer Miller moved closer, his metallic handcuffs catching the cold blue light from my screen. I didn't flinch. I didn't even stand up. As a CID investigator, I am trained to remain the calmest person in the room when the world is screaming. I haven't been forgotten. I've been underestimated. "Officer, look at the spectral analysis on my monitor," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. I turned the laptop toward him, showing the jagged lines of the audio frequency. The extortion recording Vance just played lacks the natural acoustic resonance of this room. It was recorded in a soundproof environment, likely a professional studio. It's a deepfake, and a sloppy one at that. Miller paused, his eyes shifting from the handcuffs to the data on the screen. He wasn't a tech expert, but he knew enough to see the inconsistency. Then, I played my hidden ace. I activated the high-fidelity covert recording I had planted on Wednesday night. The speakers filled the room not with my voice, but with Vance and Isolde's. Their voices were clear, casual, and utterly monstrous. They were discussing the optimal timing to shut off the gas valve. Vance's voice echoed. "By the time we get back from Cancun, the frost will have done the work. The house will be ours, and Sherwin's insurance payout will cover the rest of the debt." The room went dead silent. Vance's tan faded into a sickly gray ash. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its boots, but when the truth finally arrives, it brings the storm with it. I looked Vance dead in the eye, watching the mask of the successful businessman crumble into the face of a cornered coward. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a weary, clinical sense of duty. This wasn't just a dining room anymore. It was an interrogation room where the evidence was finally shouting. That's where the power shifted. I turned my attention to Isolde. She was standing by the sideboard, her knuckles white as she gripped her designer bag. I pulled up the wire transfer records I had recovered from the 11/24 safe. Vance didn't just lose money on investments, officer, I said, my gaze fixed on my sister. He was funneling Alara's pension and Sherwin's military savings to cover Isolde's embezzlement at her PR firm. This wasn't a family struggle. It was a corporate cover-up funded by the blood of their own kin. The cold reality hit the room like an ice water bath. Sherwin, the daughter they tried to erase, was now the one reading out their death warrants. I revealed the specific double indemnity clause in Alara's insurance that Isolde had researched. A clause that paid out double if she died of natural causes in an unmaintained dwelling. I came home looking for family, and I found a predator in a designer dress. You didn't just want the house, Isolde. You wanted to erase every witness to your own failure. Isolde didn't cry. She didn't beg. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it felt like a physical heat. But I didn't hate her back. Mercy is not for the person who hurt you. It's the peace you give to yourself by refusing to become like them. I am a soldier, and a soldier protects. I wasn't there to destroy them. I was there to stop them from destroying Alara. I realized then that my sister had never been my sibling. She had always been a rival in a game, only she was playing. Officer Miller didn't need to hear anything else. His expression hardened into a mask of professional disgust. He signaled to his partner at the door. Vance, Isolde Vance, you are under arrest for elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted endangerment of a senior. The sound of the handcuffs clicking into place was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was the sound of a debt finally being collected. The victim mask they had worn for years was shattered on the dining room floor. As they were being let out, I pulled out the emergency guardianship order and the eviction notice Judge Monroe had signed that morning. I looked at Xanthi, who was trembling in the corner, her sun-kissed skin looking sallow and old. The house is now under my sole legal protection, Mother, I said, my voice devoid of malice but full of iron. The Cancun vacationers no longer have the right to remain on this property. You have 30 minutes to pack a single bag. The police will escort you out. Xanthi's grieving mother persona vanished in a flash of vitriol. She began screaming, calling me a traitorous brat, and a monster who ruined her own family. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply gestured toward the door as the winter wind began to howl through the foyer. You taught me survival, I thought as she was led away. I just didn't think I'd have to survive you. Looking back, that was the most honest moment we ever shared. The house grew quiet as the red and blue lights faded from the frosted windows. I stood alone in the dining room, the blue light of my laptop the only thing left to guide me. The house of cards hadn't just fallen. It had been cleared away by a storm of their own making. For the first time in my life, I wasn't panicking. I wasn't waiting for their approval or fearing their judgment. I walked to the window and watched the police cruisers disappear into the Winnetka shadows. The silence of the house finally felt peaceful rather than murderous. The war in the dining room was over, and the truth had survived. I checked my watch. It was nearly midnight. I had a phone call to make to the hospital, and a life to start building from the wreckage. 3 months have passed since the frost nearly claimed this house. Today, the gray slush of a brutal Chicago winter has finally surrendered to the vibrant, stubborn green of budding crocuses. I stand in the sunroom of the Winnetka estate, watching the meltwater drip from the eaves in a steady, rhythmic pulse. Inside, the furnace hums with a quiet, reliable strength. But the real warmth doesn't come from the vents. It comes from the golden Illinois sunlight flooding the room, illuminating the face of the woman sitting in the armchair beside me. Alara looks at the garden, her strength returning with the season. I am no longer in my military uniform, but my posture remains that of a soldier standing guard over something precious. True silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the absence of fear. We didn't just fix the heater in this house. We healed the foundation. Every forensic markers of the crime, the severed wires, the icy tiles, the locked drawers of secrets, has been replaced with symbols of care and restoration. I've spent my transition leave transforming this place into a sanctuary where Alara can grow old with the dignity she earned. I bring her a cup of tea, the porcelain warm against my palms. My military training taught me how to fight, but Alara taught me what was worth fighting for. Looking back now, I realize that the hardest battles aren't fought on foreign soil, but in the quiet hallways of the places we call home. Justice isn't a destination, Grandma, I whisper as I set the saucer down. It's the ground we stand on now. She reaches out and squeezes my hand, her grip no longer desperate, but anchored. That's where the healing started. Later that afternoon, the atmosphere shifts as the front door opens. This time, there is no scent of expensive sea salt or the arrogance of unearned luxury. Under the strict supervision of Judge Monroe and a court-appointed monitor, Vance and Xanthi enter. They are not in prison, a mercy Alara insisted upon. Nung ho pai chu trak niem. They are here for a mandatory restitution and accountability meeting. They look smaller than they did in November, stripped of the bravado that comes from spending someone else's life savings. I sit across from them in the den, the very room where I uncovered their betrayals. I present the court-mandated repayment schedule with clinical precision. Vance and Isolde are now working state-monitored jobs, with 70% of their wages garnished to repay Alara's estate and the insurance funds they tried to steal in my name. Their access to this house is legally restricted to supervised visits. When Vance begins to grumble about the hardship of his new life, I don't raise my voice. I simply look at him until he withers. Accountability is the only ladder out of the hole you dug, Vance, I say, my voice steady and devoid of malice. I'm not punishing you to be cruel. I'm holding you to a standard you should have held for yourself. Forgiveness is a gift I give myself, but respect is a debt you have to earn back. I look at Xanthi, who is staring at her hands. You wanted a lifestyle you didn't earn. Now you'll learn the value of a dollar you actually work for. That is the greatest act of love I can show you. As the meeting ends and they are escorted out, the air in the house feels lighter. I help Alara out into the budding garden. We walk slowly, her weight leaning on my arm, a familiar and welcome pressure. We stop beside a new maple tree I planted last week. Alara runs her fingers over the smooth bark and whispers, "The truth doesn't freeze, does it, Sherwin?" I smile, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. No, Grandma. It just waits for the sun. I know many of you watching this video have experienced your own winters. Winters of the soul, where you feel invisible or abandoned by the very people who should be supporting you. We all have seasons that we think will never end. But remember, your worth isn't defined by those who don't see it. It's defined by the boundaries you're brave enough to set and the truths you're strong enough to speak. I sat in the darkness for a long time waiting for someone to rescue me and realized that I was the one who held the light. The sun began to set over the horizon of Lake Michigan, casting a long golden glow over the garden. I didn't come home for a vacation. I came home to awaken a ghost. Ultimately, the strongest version of myself isn't the armed man in a foreign land, but the man who carries the truth in his own home. The home is no longer a tomb. It's a lighthouse. And as the first stars appeared in the Chicago sky, the first step toward justice began with a steady breath. The most important investigation I ever undertook wasn't for the military, but for my own soul. I stopped being a victim when I realized that silence isn't peace. It's just a breeding ground for secrets. If you're currently fighting for your dignity, remember, the truth not only sets you free, but also restores the home you thought you'd lost. I'm waiting to hear your stories below, because your courage is the only thing the cold can't kill.